Hi, I'm Dr. Robert Cohen. Today I'm going to talk to you about how to ace the SAT essay. So it's not enough just to write well on the essay. The test makers are looking for a couple of specific things that aren't necessarily intuitive. But fortunately, it's not too hard to figure out what these things are. That's because College Board has released a lot of SAT essays that are graded and reviewed, so we can really get a sense of what they're looking for. So based on this released information, today I'm going to talk to you about I'm going to give you a couple of guidelines to follow that if you use these guidelines when you practice and on the test, they'll really help you to write a great essay. So first, let's talk about the structure. The best structure to use is an introductory paragraph where you present your argument. You take one side of the prompt, basically, and you argue for that side with two supporting examples, no more than two. So the opening paragraph is short. It states your position on the argument, and it lists your two examples, and very succinctly says how they're going to prove and support your argument. Then you have two paragraphs, and these are really the bulk of the essay. Each of them treats one of the examples in a lot of detail. College Board loves detail, and they always relate back to the argument. You want to make sure that the examples that you're using relate very clearly or support the argument very clearly. Then you have a final paragraph. It's also very short. It's a lot like the opening paragraph. In slightly different language, you restate your argument and how your two examples have successfully proven that argument. Now, is this the only way to get a good score using this structure? No. People have gotten perfect scores using all sorts of different structures. However, more often than not, the best scores come from essays that employ this structure based on two examples only. I looked at a random sample of 13 released essays, so 13 SATs with released essays, and what I found was that of those that earned perfect scores, 70% of them used only two examples. So this is really the best structure to use if in terms of what consistently gets the best scores. So and it's I think the best structure because it allows you to have a somewhat nuanced argument. You have two examples that can support the argument in slightly different ways. They shouldn't say the exact same thing. But you don't have so many examples that you have to treat each superficially and don't go into sufficient detail. Like I said, the College Board loves detail, and they want you to put a lot of detail into each example. So two examples is kind of just right. It lets you really go in depth with each. Make sure that you do include dates, proper names. Just throw as many specifics into your examples as you can. And don't worry if the dates are slightly off. The College Board says that they're not testing you. They will not test you on the truth or the accuracy of the information you provide. They're just testing you on the logic of your argument and how good the writing is. So it's okay to fudge dates a bit. If you're not sure, just put in a date. Don't worry about it. Now, I'm not saying to write that Pearl Harbor occurred in the 1700s, because you very well may have a history teacher reading your essay, and let's face it, he or she might be somewhat rubbed in the wrong way by that. So, try not to be very clearly fraudulent and make really false claims that are just totally ridiculous. But do put in dates and specifics, and don't worry if they're somewhat off. You're given 2 pages on the essay. Try to fill as much of the 2 pages as you can. A faculty member at MIT ran the data and found that in all of the released essays, there was a really unusually strong correlation between essay length and essay score. The longer the essays were, the higher the scores were, pretty consistently. So try and use as much of those 2 pages as you can, and at least make sure to use a page and a half. Leave 3 to 5 minutes at the beginning of the essay and at the end of the essay. At the beginning of the essay, to plan your essay, you'll want to come up with your argument in your 2 examples, and then spend that time at the end of the essay to review it, to check for grammatical errors, spelling errors, add some extra details where you can, to just tweak it a little bit. You should be using SAT level vocabulary on the essay, so try and sprinkle in some difficult words. And this shouldn't be hard because you're going to be learning these while you're studying for the critical reading section. So the test makers want to see that you're using sophisticated SAT level vocabulary, so it will help your writing score, and doing so will also help you to remember these words as you're studying them for critical reading. So make sure to always try and be using them in your practice essays. However, make sure that you're using them correctly. Make sure to use a varied sentence structure. So, for example, don't start each sentence with the same exact word, like Jane likes to go to the movies. Jane's seen a lot of movies recently. Jane's favorite movie. You want to avoid that sort of repetition. Make sure the structure of the sentences varies. And one way to help do this is by including rhetorical questions in the essay, which add a lot of stylistic variety. Make sure that each new paragraph begins with a strong and clear transition. Use the active voice rather than the passive voice. So Jane ate her cereal is always preferable to the cereal was eaten by Jane. Avoid using I. The SAT says that you're allowed to use I, that it's not going to negatively impact your score, but you have to remember that your essay is being graded by teachers who, day in and day out, are telling their students not to use I in their academic writing. So it's best to avoid it. You also want to avoid really overtly political or religious arguments. Again, the test makers say that this should not make any difference in how the reader evaluates your essay. But at the end of the day, a human being with religious and political views is going to be reading the essay. So it's best to get the most objective evaluation of your essay to stay away from these topics if you can. The safest examples to use are academic examples. So those taken from history, literature, art, and again, the College Board says it doesn't matter whether you use personal examples and anecdotes or academic ones, but your essay is being graded by someone whose job is teaching a subject like history or literature. So I think it's to your advantage to use those sorts of examples, and you'll see that the vast majority of high-scoring essays do use academic examples. Some things that can be helpful to do if there's an opportunity to do so in the essay are to include counter-arguments. This helps strengthen your argument by anticipating and then rejecting a counter-argument, and it's also a very sophisticated technique that looks impressive. You might also want to consider concluding your essay. If you're having trouble coming up with the final sentence, you might want to consider using a hypothetical. So if X, Y, and Z, if X happened, then everything would work out really well, or if it didn't happen, it wouldn't work out well. This can be a good way to restate your argument in a slightly nuanced way. Another thing you can do is include the quote that the test makers provide you with in your concluding sentence. And this is a way to restate your thesis without sounding too repetitive. So you might start by saying, for example, Benjamin Franklin's belief that, and then you include the quote, life must be lived without abandon, is a timeless truth. So make sure to practice by writing a lot of timed essays using real College Board prompts. Follow these guidelines, you'll be on your way to a great score.